We're delighted that we're able to connect with the street, and it's time this happened, as I said. And I was trying to invent a new phrase, and I think we've all got to find the hero within ourselves, and there are a lot of heroes here today. But the heroes need to connect with people like Dowd, who've been working on monetary reform all their lives. And there is a global monetary reform movement. And it would be a shame for activists out there not to learn from those who've been studying for many years. The other thing I want to say today, so that's background to Global Vision and why we're here. We're looking at the diagnosis and the solution. The other thing I want to say briefly before I introduce the speakers is Global Vision has been engaged in promoting an ethical, you need to know what's different about us compared to all the others. We've been engaged in promoting an ethical, moral and Islamic, that's universal Islamic values, in terms of financial and economic solutions before the crash, during and now. So we're not new to the game. And we have been providing a platform to other monetary reformers, organizations and companies actually, to articulate a holistic paradigm and solution. And our vision is very simple. I'm not going to chalk it out today, but just to give you the big picture, we have got a vision of a moral political economy. A moral, that is the key word. We've got a vision for a global, moral political economy. And we believe that the method, this can be achieved without war and riots and other methods. But that means that we need to move towards a universal paradigm shift. In other words, we need a moral, spiritual, cultural revolution by the masses. Let me repeat that. We have a vision of a global moral political economy which can only be achieved by moving towards the universal paradigm shift via a moral, spiritual, cultural revolution. That doesn't mean war, civil war, or riots. It means basically mass re-education of the people. Indeed, I would be delighted if we had a burning of certain economic textbooks. That's one of the implications. A lot of the junk that we've been fed, these theories, disguised as a discipline, should be burnt. That's one of the implications of this revolution. Not war or riots. Just before Dowd comes on board, right now we are seeing the entire European and North American financial system turning into one big hyperinflationary bubble that cannot be sustained. As a result of this bubble, speculative bubble, the real economies of Europe and the Americas are being... For those who haven't got the message, let's bring it to the grassroots. Only recently have we seen another company going bust or bankrupt. I think it's Thomas Cook, yeah? Big names that we all know are going down the drain. Yeah, that's what's happening. The real economy is being real jobs, real companies are going down the tube because of the bigger problem, the meltdown. So we've got a combined financial hyperinflation and a physical economic breakdown playing at breakneck speed. What we are witnessing, there was some academic here the other day talking about literature and the market, describing the market. The reality is we are seeing no less than a death spiral. People talk about the market being this, that and the other. What we are seeing is death, the death of a system, a death spiral, unfortunately. And the debt-based financial usury system is deleveraging with a quadrillion derivative bubble which cannot be bailed out with the age of austerity. Whether the immediate trigger for a total meltdown of the transatlantic banking system is a Greek or an Italian default, or the collapse of a major Wall Street bank is of little consequence. The transatlantic region is doomed in the very near term, because nothing within the framework of the current system and paradigm can avert the inevitable collapse. The time frame for this disintegration is measured in days, weeks or months. I'm not a doomsayer. but this type of analysis is coming from monetary experts, even in America. Some famous names, what I've just said there. We are in a very dangerous situation. No wonder I was on the Iranian news agency there just, this week. How come the breakdown of Iranian-UK relations, just happened like that? Did that just happen like that? Or is it, the spark of a potential Cold War moving into a hot war? Not just with Iran, like the First World War, it was Sarajevo, it would bring in China and Russia. So we are on the verge of very, very dangerous times because of the onrushing disintegration of the financial and monetary underpinnings. And there is, as I said, there's a danger of the financial oligarchy resorting to war and unleash an Armageddon. So to sum up, Global Vision has a vision of a moral political economy. We've got a slogan towards moving towards a universal paradigm shift. To use another simple slogan, we're talking about clean money and a clean house. Clean money and a clean house. Not to burn down the system. And that's it. And we're delighted that we're with the 99% here. Dare I say 99.99%, because the enemy out there, if it is an enemy, is very, very few. They're criminals. We need to identify them and clean the house. Without further ado, the first speaker is David Pidcock, in Arabic Daud Pidcock, great monetary reform thinker, and he's also, for instance, helped edit this book called The Other Road to Serfdom, How Unregulated Capital Caused the Crash of 2008, and many, many other things I can't even talk about. So without further ado, Daud Pidcock, one of our top Global Vision thinkers. I'm delighted he's come all the way from Sheffield. He will give a bit on what is the cause of the crash. Over to you, Daud. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. Very good. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, shalom alaikum, peace be with you. And for those who are more Bank of England than Church of England, hello. Right. I'm going to try and be as brief as I can, but just to pass on to you, so you don't have to go through the things I've spent 35, 40 years actually, so you can actually get on, realize what you're doing is right, absolutely. It's necessary, because unfortunately what we understand from history is that we learn nothing from it, and we're not allowed to have unprejudiced history. As Napoleon said, history is constructed from lies which are no longer contested. And unfortunately, Waterloo was a disaster for us in England, because had Napoleon won at Waterloo, we wouldn't be sitting here today, because he'd already abolished interest and debt in France, and he understood that Europe would have no peace until debt and interest was eliminated from the economy. On looking at the debt of France, he said, who the bell tolls, the deadly facts herein reveal that it is amazing that this monster interest has not devoured all humanity. It would have done so long ago had not bankruptcy and revolution acted as counterpoisons. He understood that the golden age in Europe was in Spain, when basically the references to dealing in interest was non-existent for nearly 600 years, and the Jewish members of my family call it the golden age. So, what I have on my lap here is in 1999 I was invited to address a conference in London, Whitechapel. Just happened to be that Eddie George, the then governor of the Bank of England, was sitting right in front of me with David Davis. I could have willingly strangled the pair of them, but there were too many witnesses. Anyway, at the time, if Moeen would hold up this book we have here, not this one, no, there's one underneath, and this was Napoleon and Islam, a book we had translated by one of the great monetary reformers, James Gibbs Stewart, translated this, originally French from 1914, but this is the real history of Napoleon, and the fact that he had basically converted to Islam and had adopted the entire principles of interest-free banking. And sorry, it's okay. Right, and so as it happens, I wanted to give a copy to Mr. George, so I gave him a copy of the book, and he wrote to me, and then we started quite a lengthy correspondence. So this is his reply to my letter. So we have it from Eddie George, then the head of the most prestigious central bank of the world until the Federal Reserve came. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, leave it all there. Right, so thank you for your letter of the 10th and the book which I'm reading. I'm sure you will not be surprised to know that I have considerable difficulty accepting some of the points you raise therein. As a starting point, you say the trend towards war is inherent in the internal economy of the modern nation. I was quoting there from Archbishop William Temple, who in 1942, almost not very far from here, was actually saying that the war was caused by the deficiencies in the monetary system and interest, debt-based interest, monetary system being the cause of war. And he then goes on to say that basically he's saying that what we were proposing is an Islamic or an ethical, Christian-based or Jewish-based. If we had the Torah, we would base it on Deuteronomy and the other prohibitions of debt and interest. And so this, then several weeks later, I happened to meet him in Sheffield. He came to Sheffield for a talk with when Galbraith had just had his final, oopsie-daisy, nice trip. Right, and he and I had a meeting in Sheffield, and then several telephone conversations about the problems, and he was trying to find out how an Islamic system could be introduced, or a system that is ethical, that would be agreeable from the CCMJ, or even from the rabbis who we are in correspondence with, and who understand that debt and interest are the cause of all their problems and all our problems. As it's important, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, except to say that the problems in this city began partly because of what happened very close to Sheffield, in Chesterfield, in 1688, where we had the meeting of four major people: the Duke of Devonshire, the Earl of Leeds, the Earl of Danby, and they met in Revolution House to plan to bring William of Orange to the United Kingdom here, and that is called Revolution House. We'd had Oliver Cromwell, we'd had then basically the deal to get rid of the king, but the deal was to set up the first central bank, and that deal was done in 1694 with the original debt and loan to William of Orange, which still stands today at, the original debt was 1.2 million, but it was levied on the British people at 8% till the Day of Judgment. Now that constitutes now from 1.2 million, it is now over $1 trillion, and we'll pay this year around 73 billion in interest payments on that original debt. So you can see where the hemorrhage is, where they're asking you to cut back and cut back. This is nonsensical. All they need to do is stop borrowing and start creating the money, as they still do in the Channel Islands, Guernsey and Jersey. They refuse to relinquish their right to issue their money debt and interest free. Consequently, rich people want to avoid capital punishment by going and living there. Their capital isn't punished by taxation. All we have to do is bring back the system we used to have before William of Orange, before we were Amsterdammed by the banking houses of Holland. And so it's simple, the simple solution. Now the bankers know it. William was talking about the prediction. The predictions have been known for the past, since the 30s, and in the 90th birthday party for Milton Friedman, Bernard Bernanke admitted in public at his meeting, saying, "We apologize, you were right. We, the Federal Reserve, caused it, but we will not do it again." They've just done exactly again what they said they were not going to do. The problem is in the fact that the money is privatized, piratized, let's say, those from Somalia, piratize the banks. And this is where the problem resides, just down the road here in the City of London. So what we need to do is realize that, as Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupt absolutely. He also said, and the bit they don't quote is, the issue which has swept down the centuries and must be fought sooner or later is the people versus the banks. You want to hear that again? The people versus the bank. That's what we're doing today. That's what you're doing today. That's what needs to happen. And Gladstone, who was also elected, he said the Bank of England, from becoming the banker's bank, has become the government's government. And he had no money in 6 figures until they set up the Post Office Savings Bank. That is the key. So the key, the Treasury should issue more M0. I have a letter from the Treasury, it's part of this, where from Anthony Nelson, not Nelson's column, no, it's okay, I think I can quote this bit, but we had a 1993 from the Monetary Reform Group. Anthony Nelson said the government can and does, to a small extent, issue debt-free, interest-free money, but there is little demand for this sort of money. How do you like? Would you like not to demand it? Just go down, so let's go down there to the Treasury and say, why not expand M0? And that would solve the problem. It's called quantitative easing. We did it in 1914 when the Bank of England collapsed on the outbreak of war. John Bradbury, the then Secretary of the Treasury, issued 500 million Treasury notes. They're called Bradburys. There's still some available, not in circulation unfortunately, but that 500 million stopped the banks collapsing. But it's not the first time. We've had 17 collapses in the past 300 years. And the whole system is because it's based on debt compounded by interest. Now, here, 2400 BC, in Lagash in Sumeria, debt was cancelled automatically in the 7th year. Debt was never allowed to exceed 7 years. Under the Mosaic law, the law of Moses, debt was the year of Jubilee, debt was cancelled in the 7th year. And basically, this is the key to understanding that there can be no peace while you've got debt. Jefferson, perhaps the most articulate of the American presidents, certainly one of the best informed, said, the modern theory, 1815, this is to the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, the modern theory for the perpetuation of debt has drenched the earth with blood and crushed its inhabitants under burdens ever accumulating. Imam Ali, 1,000 and odd years before that, said, we withstood the weight of the iron, the stone and the lash, but found the hardest thing to endure is the burden of debt. The riots that we've seen in Tottenham, we had, remember, in 1999, just that same year that the letter was here, they were having the riots then. It was the anti-capitalist carnival. Remember that? But it's the same problem. The cause of the problem is always indebtedness. People cannot withstand the burden of debt. So, it's very, very, very upsetting to see people having to do this. There's no need. Let's stop it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dowd. Those who've not got seats, either you can sit there somewhere or squeeze in wherever you are. Please feel free. By the way, it's not just one-way traffic. There is plenty of time for questions. So keep them warm, keep them ready. But we will inspire you with another 2 speakers. By the way, Dowd's been very active with Global Vision before us, even before our events in Parliament. Indeed, some of his speeches from Parliament in our parliamentary events are on our website, video, and you can download them free. It's at globalvision2000.com, www.globalvision2000.com, for those who want, the real McCoy. Now, without further ado, Global Vision's quite well known to have people working, as an independent international Islamic think tank with Christian groups. We don't work with any Christian groups, especially those who know a thing or two. Usually we have Canon Reverend Challen. He's not here today, but I'm delighted we've got Simon Merritt. He's also an academic in this field, and he's also from the Christian Monetary Justice Movement. Thank you very much for coming, Simon. Over to you.
Thank you, Maureen. As Maureen said, I'm a monetary economist and an academic, and I've got a research interest in transforming the financial system. Yeah. Oh, okay. We'll pause.
Carries on for about 10 minutes. Oh, okay. What would you like to do? Wait.
Good sound, right?
Very good sound. For whom the bell tolls, yeah.
I like that. For whom the bell tolls.
Yeah. It's the Bank of England and that lot. For a change. That Southampton report, you're just going to look at it, you're not put it down.
Just grab a seat. The bells don't toll for us, hopefully. I think it's some of the institutions in this area. Okay, let us start again. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. In the name of the Lord, the most gracious, the most merciful. Without further ado, we've got some new faces again. My name's Moin Yasin from Global Vision. We got delayed by half an hour. That is fate, our destiny, but we continue the journey for the truth. Daud Pidcock spoke very elegantly and succinctly. Thank you. And as I said, his speech is also on the website video from the House of Lords on Global Vision. That's www.globalvision2000.com. Our second speaker, without further ado, is Simon Merritt. He's representing the Christian Council for Monetary Justice. He's been at it for a long time. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Maureen. Well, this is an interfaith forum in a sense, but we're kind of working together. It's not really a cozy interfaith sort of forum. In a fickle sense, it's based on a genuine desire to work together and genuine friendships in many cases as well. And we're really seeking solutions that work for people. We're trying to find the issues that resonate with the major faiths and also the secular community as well, and this is really our desire. We recognise the need that we need to be working together. We're in this together, and unless we actually find these solutions, people and planet are in a serious state. Marx in the 19th century pointed out that philosophers interpret the world, but we need to change it. The point is to change it. And I'd like to just point out a little quote that I've found from Capital Volume 1, which is actually a quote from Martin Luther. Marx is talking about Luther, and he points out, Luther shows us very aptly that the love of power is an element in the desire to get rich. And he then goes on to quote Martin Luther and his rant, really, against usury and the charging of interest. The heathen were able, by the light of reason, to conclude that a usurer is a double-dyed thief and murderer. We Christians, however, hold them in such honour that we fairly worship them for the sake of their money. Whoever eats up, robs and steals the nourishment of another, that man commits as great a murder as he who starves a man or utterly undoes him. Such does a usurer, and sits the while safe on his stool, when he ought rather to be hanging on the gallows.
Amen. Amen.
That's strong stuff, but hopefully we are hoping to bring the whole financial sector into the desire for change. Perhaps not sure about people's particular positions there. It seems to me that we need to actually establish reform of the financial system. Yet at the same time, we have a capitalist system that's been around for a good 500 years, from mercantile capitalism into industrial capitalism, with the debt-based money system that we have associated with it. But it seems to me that we've reached that point in time where we need to directly identify that economic system as the root of the problem. The root of our political issues, social issues, and so forth. And we have a responsibility for our children here. We need to actually find a solution that works for people and works for planet. And that's why we're here. An issue I just want to really get across is something that's quite close to my own personal conviction. I used to think that in order to bring about real change, one first of all needed to understand the problem at a deep level, in terms of understanding the mechanics and rationale and alternative theories and some of the practicalities needed for transition. And I still do believe those things are important. But I thought it was a case of trying to win hearts and minds. I now believe it's more a case of trying to win the heart. I'm not sure if you're aware or not, but there's been a recent scientific study called heartmath.org. They've recently published their results. And one of the significant findings of this particular scientific work was that we don't actually think in our minds, we actually think in our heart. And I find that a very, very interesting dynamic. I'm very conscious of the fact if I'm listening to someone speak or if I'm reading something, if my heart favours the particular person, it almost sends a message or a signal to my brain to find a reason to latch on what I actually feel in my heart. And if we don't favour someone, if we don't favour what they're saying or the spirit of what they're saying, it's almost like the brain looks for reasons to criticise. And for that reason, it seems to me that because we actually need to build something together here, this is a Judaism, Islam, secular, Christian collaboration that is required here. How are we going to find these principles that work for everyone and work for the earth? So it seems to me that we need to find principles, ideas that actually resonate in the heart of all of these different faith communities. And if we can do that, then I think we're in a position to be able to actually do something. So I just want to say thank you for the Occupy movement for bringing the issues forward. And it's a great encouragement to people that really genuinely desire change.
Thank you for that, Simon. Wasn't very long-winded, but he emphasised the spirituality and the need for global monetary reformers to connect with the street. So without further ado, we have another fellow Christian traveller, Reverend Paul Wilkinson from Nicholson, from the Zacchaeus Trust. I'm very pleased that he's been able to join us today, and I think he wants to connect some of these issues with the street, you know, what's really going on. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I run a trust which provides practical, legal and emotional support to the very poorest people in the United Kingdom who are in debt to the state. They can't pay their rent, they can't pay their council tax, they can't pay their fines. And we began in 1997 as a response to the poll tax, which was taxing the poorest. And we now have 3 full-time lawyers and 32 volunteers, and we're dealing with around 100 cases of very, very, very poor and stressed debtors at any one time. I think that broadly speaking, the general principle which binds us together as Jews, Muslims or Christians is that we love our neighbour, and as I understand it, Christians and we all love everyone without prejudice, but we put the sick, the disabled, the hungry, the homeless and the poorest citizens first. And it's quite clear to me that what has happened is that the free economy has stood that principle on its head. So I hope to show how the living principle, that heartfelt principle, is being turned on its head by British government. Yesterday we had Skidelsky, Lord Robert Skidelsky here, and he made the point, which I felt was reasonable, that we have a global economy, but we have national democracies which are failing. and they are having a great problem coping with global economy. And so let's look at the Times on Friday. It is unfair, said Anushka Astana, that the rent of a council house is £440 a week, and the rent charged by a private landlord is £750 a week for a similar house next door. And of course it is certainly unfair, but the private tenant's indignation should not be aimed at should be aimed at landlords, government and the City of London, not the welfare system or their neighbour. And if you go through one of those after the other, landlords have been the beneficiaries of billions of pounds of our taxes in housing benefit every year since lending was deregulated in the 1980s, and the housing benefit rose to 21 billion last year. Government allowed that flood of lending to push the prices of rents and indeed housing benefit in the housing market in short supply way up high. And people in the City of London, and not everybody, it has to be said, I think, because if my principle is right, we even have to love bankers, even though we put the poor first. But not everybody, but very significant numbers of people recklessly exploited the lack of regulation of lending. So we have very high and very expensive housing, high rents and high housing benefits. The landlords and indeed the wealthy have not taken a hit at all. There's nothing serious is happening to them at all. In fact, the headline saying the Queen is going to have to suffer austerity, I mean, it won't happen at that level. She may not be able to put up her budget by anything for a year, but she's not going to feel anything at all. Whereas the people I'm working with are feeling it. It is the welfare claimants, the low paid, the poorest, who are paying the penalty for 30 years of bad government. And indeed, that is what we've had, bad government, for well over 30 years. So the landlords and wealthy and the landowners are untouched by deficit reduction, and let me describe in detail some of the problems that are being faced by the very poorest in this country. Housing benefit caps will result in rent arrears, eviction, and indeed of an exodus from Westminster and Kensington boroughs out to Tottenham, out to London, and even further. People will simply not be able to pay their rents. At the moment, the people we're meeting who are going to be caught by this from the 1st of January are simply in denial. They can't believe it's happening, and I must say I have to pinch myself to believe it's happening. Uprating a benefit from RPI to CPI reduces by £1 a week every £50 paid out in unemployment benefits every year. So adults' unemployment benefit is £67.50. Already half the government's poverty threshold and 42% of the Joseph Roundtree minimum income food standard, and that will be worth £57 in 10 years' time. Meanwhile, the Joseph Roundtree minimum income standard for food is £46.31 a week, and in 10 years' time, if nothing is done about adult unemployment benefits, the price of food will be higher than the adult unemployment benefit, which has to pay for, of course, transport, clothing, and other necessities, and is already so tightly squeezed that he can't do that. And the first thing that this government did when it came into power was to launch the Savings Account and Health in Pregnancy Grant Bill, which, together with other measures, has removed £1,734 from the income of unemployed pregnant women while they're pregnant and during the first year of their child's lives. Now, British governments have been unable to grasp since 1972, when Professor Michael Crawford showed, specifically, quite scientifically, and indeed internationally supported, the fact that women need a healthy diet before they conceive and while they are pregnant, to diminish the risk of lifetime mental and physical ill health of their children. So we're forcing women into a situation where they literally cannot buy a healthy diet before they conceive, which is just as important as while they're pregnant, and in order to properly look after their children when they are born, and there's a consequence of lifetime mental and physical illness. The welfare reform bill is a harsh bill, handing unprecedented powers and discretions to officials in job centres throughout the United Kingdom. They can impose penalties and sanctions. Sanctions and penalties are DWP speak, Department of Work and Pensions speak, for fines. They can recover overpayments, otherwise known as debts. And they have none of the normal rules that go on in a court. There is no clerk there to tell them how to keep the law. There's no right of representation for the claimants who have these punishments enforced against them. And there's a real issue which we're going into at the moment, because we have an amendment down to the Welfare Reform Bill, which will come up in the report stage of the bill probably after Christmas, is to what the effect on the right to a fair trial is under the European Convention of Human Rights, so under Article 6. So that's immense stress, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists who are supporting our amendment, and mine, and the Government Office for Science, has shown that there is a clear relationship between debt and mental illness, and that is hugely expensive for the health service. So we go round and round and round, we make people ill, and they go off to the health service and cost a fortune to the taxpayer that way. It would be much better to give them the money in the first place so that they don't fall ill. The other thing that has shocked me quite somewhat recently to discover is that the job centres have now been instructed by government to refer people to food banks if they are hungry. And there is a plan by a trust called the Trussell Trust, and this is where we get caught, us trusts. You can't refuse to feed people if you're a Christian trust. But we're forced into a position of having to feed people because the whole system went wrong, and now money's been taken out of the pockets of the very poorest. And this trust is going to build up to the point of 60,000 and 100,000 food banks in the United Kingdom. I am ashamed to be British when I think that we're going to have as a part of our social policy the extension of food banks. I'd just like to go through one case, if I may, that I dealt with myself, and the sort of situations which arise. The most likely fine that people are to get is not having a TV license, and that becomes a criminal fine and goes to magistrate's court. There were 400,000 TV license fines last year, and Jean Jones, I've changed her name, was a single mother on benefit with 3 young children, and she takes full advantage. She's exactly what Ian Duncan Smith and this government would like. She goes and takes her £20 disregard. She's allowed to earn £20 a week on top of her benefit without getting into trouble. She goes off and she does that once a week and works in a cafe. However, she fails to pay her TV license. She's summoned to court, she's frightened, she doesn't go, she's fined £220 and £60, fined £220 plus £60 cost in her absence, and doesn't pay. And then she's threatened with the bailiffs. Well, in a panic, she borrows £400 from Provident PLC, the largest doorstep lenders, who charge £260 interest so she can fend off the bailiffs. And it's always these door-to-door lenders and the loan sharks. This is legal, the door-to-door lender. The illegal loan sharks are always there at the crisis, ready to exploit the crisis when somebody is panicking about the bailiffs likely to call and don't want them to happen. And it's very frightening for a woman on her own with 3 small children to have 2 large men threatening to break in outside to enforce fines. So it's not surprising that Provident PLC are a highly profitable company recommended by stockbrokers, and particularly because we're now in a recession. And it really is, it's outrageous. So we then go on, and of course the other infuriating issue is that we have been trying, and indeed we are continuing to try, first of all to get a limit on the interest. If you're going to have interest, you might as well limit it, that Provident can charge, but also to regulate them, and they are totally unregulated, and also to regulate bailiffs. There's absolutely no regulation of bailiffs, and they will charge £150 on top of the fine. So a single mother is beginning to build up debts in the relation to sort of £600, £700 simply because she didn't pay her TV license. And the bailiffs are outrageous because they make unnecessary visits and charge £50 a time, or they will, all as a result of debt, of course, and they will. Then they will say, well, look, we're going to have to come and take your furniture, and therefore we'll charge you £150 because we brought the van round. And on it goes, and it needs very, very urgently needs regulating. However, we got the case back to court, and the fine reduced to £70 plus £60 cost, and I'm glad to say the magistrate sent the bailiff off without their fees, but probably went on collecting that loan with interest. Her income was £203.96 after rent and council tax had been paid, but of course that had to pay debts for food, for 3 children, clothes and everything, and it's nothing like enough. But she also had debts of £2,341. Quite impossible situation, which is simply brought about by high interest lending, by low incomes imposed by government, and by high costs, and increasingly high costs for people. Food and fuel are, of course, hitting the poor is very hard, and all of us very hard, at a time when the benefits are being drastically cut. So let me just round off. Time and again, Parliament has been told by ministers talking about the Welfare Reform Bill that these draconian punishments are to change the culture and behaviour of the poorest unemployed. There's a frightening behavioural team, behavioural insights team in the Cabinet Office. Did you know about that? It really is an extraordinary situation. Now, forgive me, may I just do the behavioural insights? It's okay, I'll get that. Yes, behavioural insights team. According to the 10 Downing Street, it's in 10 Downing Street, it promotes government by nudge rather than regulation, because this government and the free market doesn't like regulation, so we don't regulate. And so it says on its website, the Cabinet wants to find intelligent ways to encourage, support and enable people to make better choices for themselves. It seems to be based on the assumption that the Cabinet always makes the best choices and the rest of us make bad choices. And some of it is absolutely bewildering. Here you get a headline called Consumer Empowerment. Giving consumers access to data held about them in electronic format by firms. This program is called My Data. It's likely to revolutionize the relationship between customers and firms, overcoming a host of behavioral biases. Well, I don't understand what that means. I really don't. And I assume it means something like, I phone up Marks and Spencer, I look on the website for the Reverend Paul Nicholson, and I find, wow, I bought Josh Rogan last week. I mean, that's the sort of level it seems to me to be at. I can't see what use it's going to be.
How much was it?
Yes, exactly. So time and again, we've been told that it's all about changing behaviour of the poorest, and they justify this disgraceful bill with the help of a biased tabloid press, and they insult millions of the unemployed. They are dependency culture, in a dependency culture. They're scroungers, work shy, and a burden on the taxpayer, when the need to work is built into the DNA of all but very, very few of us. And if we're going to have an ethical and moral economy, we've got to get our lending under control, our interest under control, and we've got to put the poor first, which I hope I've illustrated is quite simply not happening and is not being done by British government.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Okay, over to you, folks. By the way, this is December. Christmas is looming. Great to have Christians, Muslims, and people of Jewish background here. I think Jesus, may peace be upon him, he'll be smiling upon us. Okay, now, as I said, it's meant to be two-way traffic. So your questions and indeed comments are most welcome. Anyone who would like to speak, please, if you raise your hand and introduce yourself. Yes, sir, and I'll also give the mic.
Hi everybody, it seems to me that what we have to do is to change the way that we live. We've got to go from a system of consumerism and materialism to one of minimalism.
With house repossession, so at the moment we've given them all our money, they're not lending for housing, the housing market is in a bit of a lull. There's about 700,000 public sector workers who will lose their jobs in the next 2 or 3 years. There was 200,000 last year. That's a lot of people that are going to be losing their house that can't work. They'll repossess those houses, then probably charge rent to their owners whilst they remain in those houses. Then when it comes back to the banks selling those houses back to them, after they've turned their money tap back on, the house will be worth 40% more. So all they've effectively done is kept the person perhaps in the house, but transferred a whole heap of debt over to that person. So it seems that part of the design of their crisis is to recharge debt onto everyone, and I was just wondering what part that had in it.
Yeah, fantastic commentary there, especially after the budget also. They've also admitted that the problem is even bigger, yeah? And the pain is going to drag for even more years. Yes, David, and then Reverend.
Yes, very good point. In 1897, the American Bankers Association sent out a circular saying that they would not renew their loans on any account, and they would take most of the farms east of the Mississippi, tens of thousands to the west of the Mississippi, and they would then rent them back to the present owners as tenants as they are in England. And this is the game plan, it is the game. And what Simon said about you know, the usurers, I mean, Vix Purveyne, it talks about it, but Hugh Kingsmill said about the city and the lenders of money to interest that they were excrement living on increment, and I think that's a pretty good description.
Fantastic. Yes, sir. Carry on.
I think the underlying problem here is we haven't had a housing policy for 40 or 50 years. There is currently no coherent housing policy to provide affordable housing of all tenures. And there are issues like land hoarding. There are land banks held by financiers which are not even taxed. And some of us have been looking at the notion of a land value tax, which has been talked about for about 100 years.
Yes.
But the point that sold me on the land value tax is that it taxes all land. It could replace a regressive council tax and regressive business rates and several other taxes. And above all, it begins to tax these land banks who are not taxed at all while they are unoccupied. We only tax occupied houses and occupied land. So, and also there are an enormous number of empty houses which are there at the same time for investment purposes. There's buy-to-let, which is an outrageous way of making profit. I mean, I've dealt with an eviction which was only being evicted because the guy wanted to make his capital profit on the house he bought to let. And that's not what housing is for. It is not an investment, it is a home. And we've got to somehow produce stable and secure homes for everybody and not put them through the hell which they're going to be put through as a result of the housing benefit that we have, regulations that we've now got.
Just if I may add a penny's worth, this issue of homelessness is going to be a big one. And I think we need to maybe have a special event on it, because I can just see it. You know, it's going to be an enormous issue, and also given it's Christmas, I'm sure Jesus would have a lot to say about homelessness.
We have on our website a memorandum on unaffordable housing dated 2005, which said the current situation was 2004 or 5. It was entirely analysed the situation then and said it would blow up effectively, said it was unsustainable. But it's a very good primer on housing policy.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Any other questions before I raise one? A big look at the global financial system. And one of the things that we have emphasised, you know, there's many groups here, and I've noted that still it's not on, you know, many of the mainstream reform movements, and that is the notion of money being a commodity. You know, price, interest, compound interest. And if we listen carefully to what Dowd said, the linkage between a debt-based financial usurious system and war, if you remember what he said in his book, Napoleon and Islam, Wellington, it was about debt and interest. He wanted to abolish it. Now, I want to bring in Dowd again on this issue, because, you know, we're trying to find the solution to the problem. It's not just a private cartel, banking cartel, which operates on criminality actually. It's not just greed, it's about compound interest. Dowd, I want to ask you to address that issue, because Muslims claim they have the Islamic finance, you know, as a solution, but often Islamic finance is separated from a moral economy. What have Muslims and Islamic philosophy of economy, political economy, got to say specifically, especially on riba?
Yes, very good point. I just actually happened to have this, the surah, the longest ayah, the longest verse in the Quran is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is 275 to 281. And it is all about contracts and things for the future. O you who believe, be careful of your duty to Allah and give up what remains of your demands for usury, if you are indeed believers. But if you do not, then take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger. If you repent, then you shall have your capital sums, neither shall you be wronged, nor shall you suffer. If the debtor is in difficulty, grant him ease till it is time for him to repay, but far better to forgive the debt, if you were but compos mentis, let's say, and guard yourself against the day which you will all return and have to account for yourselves. Now, war, I'll just come to this point here. Silvio Gesell in 1918, Silvio Gesell, on the signing of the armistice in 1918, this is when they were all gathered round, he was saying in Zeitung am Mittag, a German language newspaper, in spite of the holy promises of people to banish war once and for all, and in spite of the cry of millions, never again war, in spite of all the hopes for a better future, I have this to say. If the present monetary system based on interest and compound interest remains in operation, I dare to predict today that it will take less than 25 years till we have another new and even worse war. I can foresee the coming development clearly. The present degree of technological advancement will quickly result in a record performance of industry. The build-up of capital will be fast in spite of the enormous losses during the war, and through the oversupply of money, the interest rate will be lowered until the money speculators refuse to lower their rates any further. Money will then be hoarded, causing predictable deflation. Economic activities will diminish, and increasing numbers of unemployed persons will roam the streets. Within these discontented masses, wild revolutionary ideas will arise, and with it also the poisonous plant called supranationalism will proliferate. No country will understand the other, and the end can only be war again. That's the promise from God. If you have interest, you will be visited by war and pestilence and everything. And this is what I was saying earlier, that there was the definition of Deuteronomy, which prohibits usury, only allowed the children of Israel to lend money at interest if they could not destroy a people who they had a right to defeat by force of arms. So interest in any society, in any community, is a weapon of war, you will self-destroy yourselves as a result of allowing it to happen. You must forbid it.
Thank you for that. I need to emphasize what he's just said, because in the global monetary reform movement, especially Western, this notion of interest is taken for granted. And I think that's a unique contribution
One more point.
Global Vision has made here, that it's not just about debt-based system, fractional reserve banking, financial oligarchy, but a usury, compound interest-based system is not normal. It's abnormal, and it will destroy us all.
It creates financial aids, acquired investment deficiency syndrome. And that's one thing. But as the point that I was going to say earlier, Dennis Healy said, such world events as the crash of 1932 and the other thing, world events occur, they are made to happen. They don't happen by accident. Whether it is to do with national issues or commerce, and most of them are staged and managed by those who hold the purse string. Now, Dennis Healy was former British Secretary of Defence and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Now, the last crash that occurred 2008 was already planned as early as 2004, and I can prove it from David Blunkett's diaries. July 2004, David Blunkett confirms it, and he's saying here, basically, and so to Special Cabinet, to the spending review announcement on Wednesday morning. Gordon was extremely friendly and talked very positively about the Home Office and me. He painted a picture, however, of what would happen from 2008 onwards, of 1.9% average growth, how dreadful things were going to become, and how everybody needed to wind down what they wanted to do now. This is 2004. I just couldn't resist putting my hand on his shoulder and saying, I'm really surprised that you would want to continue being Chancellor with such an awful, dreadful scenario. There was utter silence. I could feel jaws dropping. Then everybody began to laugh. When I saw Tony Blair afterwards for a private meeting, he said, only you could have got away with that. And I thought to myself, I wonder if I have. But I just couldn't resist making the comment. So, they knew, Goldman Sachs, the whole thing is a charade. Everything is planned, everything is run, everything, or the idea of Chinese walls is nonsense. It is a game of con men, and as Churchill, to paraphrase him, never in the field of human contricts has so much been owed by so many to so few.
Thank you, Dawood. So back to the slogan of moving towards a universal paradigm shift, clean money, clean house. I'd like to pass it on to Simon from the Christian Council for Monetary Justice, what he's got to say about debt-based and financial usury.
What would Jesus say?
I suppose we could ask him. I just want to make a point, and I agree with what David was saying, that we need to eliminate interest from our financial system. And this will go a tremendous way, I believe, to creating the type of world that we want to live in. But I do think, just as a word of caution, that there is more to deal with capitalism. There's more than one route of exploitation within capitalism. The money system is one. Another route of exploitation is rentierism, the ownership title to property, be that land, be that houses, as we've been discussing, be that technology. And the access to the ownership title of these items of private property can be leased and rented, and it gives power to rentiers that can earn an unearned income from their property. So there's a danger, perhaps, as the world's media has turned its attention to the financial sector. And one of the things that slightly concerns me about this is that why is there so much attention focused on the finance sector? Why have the global media been happy to let us know about Fred the Shred or other financial sector institutions? And it seems to me that perhaps we're meant to be hating the financial sector at the moment, and I guess one of my concerns is that if we wanted to deal with a national deficit and a accumulated national debt, we could, as has already been suggested today, introduce interest-free provision of Treasury bonds, which would save the 70 billion annual interest currently being charged. Another thing we can do is we can force the FTSE 100 companies to actually pay the correct amount of tax that is currently being sorted away to offshore financial centres, and it's costing the UK exchequer billions each year. So it seems to me that there are several areas of exploitation, and of course there's the labourer himself or herself, that people not actually receiving the full rewards for their labour, and the exploitation of the business vis-a-vis the labourer. So taking Marx's critique here from the 19th century of the Proudhonists, Proudhon, Alfred Darriman and so forth, they kind of recommended a reform of the financial system, and he was saying yes, but in dealing with the financial system there is still these other elements of exploitation that need to be taken into consideration. So for me it's, let's reform the financial sector, yes, but bear in mind that we've got an entire economic system, lest we get the exploiters just transferring their mode of exploitation. From hiya Mary. So yeah, they're my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
In my years, I have come to the conclusion that one useless man is a shame. Two is a law firm. And three is an entire Congress. Now, what I'm here to suggest is that there are enough in this room here to bring world peace and to change the whole system. Right here. Right here. And the scientists today agree with you when they say it's the heart and not the head. Because the heart has an electromagnetic system which can actually go around the world. It has no geographical space to it, and there's no time constraints to it at all. So that's why prayer works. But it's not like it's prayer to some deity that is external to ourselves and up in the sky or whatever you may want to do. And so I must say that I'm a metaphysical Christian, but on the other hand, I'm so excited about Buddha. I'm so excited about what Muhammad has said in a book that's called Peace. Get that? Peace. So Islam is peace. However, what I'm saying essentially here is there's no program that's going to solve this. I'm glad you're doing your research. I'm glad other people are doing research. There's no program that's going to solve this. It's only a shift in consciousness which does the job. That's why when people know that I lecture on ontology, they say, what's ontology? What's ontology? What's ontology? Well, it's the other side of cosmology. So cosmology is a universal principle. The ontological principle is within. It is within. So now that our scientists and our spirituality people can come together and say it's basically the same thing, that it is our consciousness which shifts the world situation. And that shifts the behavior, and it shifts the attitude, and it actually comes more from love than it does from power. And so here we have a situation, yes, where we can allow this to happen. Let's have more tent cities, but on the other hand, I like the first thing I saw when I came here on the first day. It said if Jesus were here, he would not be in that domed building wearing a robe and maybe a hat. He'd be out here in his bare feet with us. Yeah. Because that's what's actually needed. And you're doing a very good job. I've been on the planet for 84 years now.
Wow.
And from that standpoint, I say that we've been waiting at least 70 of those 84 years for this to happen. But it also, I'm around for another 84 years because we've got to get the thing really functioning. And so please join me in that. I love you all, and I also recognize that this is where the power is, because this is where the consciousness goes into its Christhood and goes into its spiritual space, and we're all a part of that. And just look at yourself within and realize we cannot do it without you.
Thank you very much for that, Carl. What can I say? Reaffirmation to the heroes within ourselves. Anyone else? Anyone else want to make a? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'll come back to you if I may. Anyone else want to open it up? Yes, from the Occupy movement, please.
And so we want to be monetary reform, not momentary reform.
Just a very quick comment. I was here, to tell the truth, I was here by mistake yesterday because I thought it was today. But very fortunately, I was able to hear Lord Robert Skidelsky talk. And he made a very interesting point, which is the current situation is normal because the normal state of capitalism is crisis. And so it's always crisis in capitalism, and it'll go on like that until monetary reform and other reforms take place.
Very good.
If I may take the chairman's prerogative, an budget, yeah, or in the budget, and basically they're saying, well, one interpretation that the pain is going to last longer, yeah. Lo and behold, you know, this comes back to debunking information, financial information, and prostitutes, as some people call them, not prostitutes, but prostitutes, yeah, disinformation. So we're all meant to suffer longer, yeah. That was certainly announced in the budget, and also they're saying we've got to sack more people, yeah, in the public sector, without going into details about, you know, whether it's bloated or not. But anyway, more sackings, yeah. Probably the other way to look at that is homelessness, really, and dispossession. So given there's more pain on the horizon in this country, yeah, never mind elsewhere, and also given what's happened in Greece, yeah, and Italy, where certain governments have been, or elected leaders have been pushed away, and technocrats, basically bankers, have come into power. I mean, where are we heading? Especially, never mind America, and UK and Europe. You know, what do you expect on the near future? I'd like to ask the panel, and what we can do, obviously. Doug first, and then others.
Yes, thank you. Well, what do you expect with a name like Goldman Sachs, other than getting sacked? And Goldman Sachs does rule the world. Look at most of the replacements now in Italy. In November of last year, the Telegraph carried how Goldman Sachs governs Italy, and the heads of all these the groups come from either Goldman Sachs. And so if you've got the head of the Treasury, all this revolving policy. So Goldman Sachs have governed the world along with Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. So the system is one that, well, it needs overhauling, and it is a monetary problem. We don't have an economic problem. We have a monetary problem. So Goldman Sachs, so expect to be sacked.
Thank you for highlighting Goldman Sachs' role in all of this. Yes, sir.
I think we've got to indeed to have monetary reform, but what for? You know, it's not enough monetary reform. It's got to happen, but it can't do it. And I've taken great hope from Occupy. I think Occupy is reflecting a mood in the country that things have gone very seriously wrong and they've got to be put right. And I hope it can improve and change our performance as Democrats. And the people I look after don't vote, and so that's why they don't get the attention of government, and so we have to speak to them. I would like to see, in their interest and in everybody's interest, the 99% interest, a minimum income standard that you can't fall below. And it's already researched by Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and we did our own bit of research back in 1998. Minimum income standards are used by other countries to ensure that everybody has a minimum income for healthy living. And the other thing is we have to produce a coherent housing policy. We can't go on with the current housing policy where it goes from one crisis to another with no control over who owns what, and maybe a land value tax, but certainly a thorough look at putting at the heart of people's lives the security of housing and the security of an income that you can expect to live on. Unemployed, with more if you're employed, certainly, to keep the whole problem of the, which government always talks about. They always talk about the moral the moral hazard of having unemployed income is too high, but they never think about the moral hazard of having them far, far, far too low, which is what we've got now. Unless we begin to give people hope in having security of income and security of housing, I think we'll have more riots. And I live in Tottenham. I live about 100 yards from the Carpet-Wright building, and I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning to see flames pouring out of the top of the building from my bedroom window, and great chunks of carpet going, great arcs landing on other houses, and I wondered whether or not my house would go up because of carpet landing on it, and it didn't. And I went out the following morning and I found that the job centre next door to Carpet-Wright had been trashed. The housing office of the local authority immediately opposite had been trashed and torched, and the magistrate's court had been trashed and torched. That was not an accident, and I think we have to take that very, very seriously indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So predictions of more social unrest unless there is fundamental reform. Yes, thank you for that. And also I think you're hinting at the need for a new social contract. Very important point actually. And finally, Simon.
Thank you. Just a clutch of policies really, I think, which all need working on. I think we need the interest-free provision of credit. I think we can promote a spread of capital ownership, redistribution of some property, the encouragement of the commons, the encouragement of alternative and complementary currencies, and so forth. All of these things I think will contribute practical policies on the ground, the encouragement of social enterprises, cooperatives, and so forth. This kind of clutch of policies, I think. But I would just like to say that my fear is that the power elites are quite exposed at this moment in time, and I think they know that. And so I guess I would also wish to recommend a form of Truth and Reconciliation committee, because if any kind of pushing forward the power elites, there's a social work term which some of you might be familiar with about the fact that people need a way out of their circumstances, and if they've been part of the problem, been complicit to the problem, perhaps they've come from generations of people that have been part of the problem, they need a way out. And so for my part, I would like to sort of recommend a serious consideration of offering people a way out.
Yeah, thank you for that, Simon. Yeah, please. Now, it might surprise you to end with some hope. Global vision. He will just end by saying how he saved the country with other Christian non-reformers. Very briefly, though.
Well, look, 1997, Malaysia survived the crash that all the other Asian tigers suffered, and that's because I took personally to Dr. Mahathir at Langkawi Air Show a 5-point plan designed by James Gibbs Stewart, Ken Palmerton, and other members of the Bromsgrove Group, the Forum for Stable Currencies, and he implemented this within 3 days. Malaysia survived. Therefore, if the IMF are telling you one thing, do exactly the opposite. There were 5 points to it. First, a measure of foreign exchange control is necessary to prevent the nation's reserves, its financial lifeblood, being sucked out by speculators. Secondly, that the progressive and accelerating liberalisation of financial markets should be reversed, as this advance towards a global economy robs developing peoples of the benefits of their own national resources.
You're not offering any solutions.
We solve the problem. Thirdly, and for the same reason, there should be no inclination to privatise or piratise national assets as a device of paying off government debts. Such assets belong to the people and should not be put up for auction, particularly when the market forces can consign them to foreign ownership. British experience of privatisation proves that selling assets to reduce the national debt is only a temporary expedient. They can only be sold off once. and when they are gone, the cycle of debt and borrowing continues. In the matter of existing loans that have gone sour, it is impossible to generalise, but each situation must be dealt with on its own merits and wherever possible to try and prevent the creation of acrimony and any trade reprisals that might result, or being bombed by NATO, which by the way stands for no action talk only. Fourthly, every endeavour should be made to avoid further borrowings, particularly from in the form of US dollars. The recent round of currency devaluations has shown this to be a treacherous device whereby international entrepreneurs can buy the local economy at bargain basement prices. And so that was basically the thing. But finally, just one thing there, just hold that point. The same day. Checking it. Right, just check. This is from George Soros, January 1997. The untrammeled intensification of laissez-faire, or less than fair I call it, capitalism, and the extension of market values into all areas of life is endangering our open and democratic society. The main enemy of the open society, I believe, is no longer the communist one, but the capitalist threat. How about that for George Soros? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. A vote of thanks for the panelists, please. And thank you for coming. You are the real heroes. Let's all find the hero within ourselves. And finally, for those who've come late and or those who want to follow on some of our work as a think tank, we have a website called Global Vision 2000.